People need to be very, very careful who they are listening to on social media, especially in the narcissistic abuse space. And I do not mean that in some vague, cynical, don't trust anyone online sort of way. I mean it structurally. I mean, people need to understand that a narcissistic person could very, very easily come onto a platform like TikTok or Instagram or YouTube and present themselves as the wounded, dysregulated, traumatized other. They could present themselves as the one who was narcissistically abused. They could present themselves as the one who was lied to, discarded, gaslit, broken, psychologically shattered, and trying to make sense of what happened. They can learn that language very quickly. They can mirror the language of victims very quickly. They can study what people respond to, what gets sympathy, what gets outrage, what gets attention, what gets engagement, what gets pity, what gets admiration, and then shape themselves accordingly. Not because they are healing, but because they are feeding. That is the part people keep missing. A platform is not just a platform. To a narcissistic structure, it can become a supply field, a stage, a mirror bank, a victimhood amplifier, a place to draw libidinal charge in from the app itself, from the people they are engaging with, from the comments, from the praise, from the emotional investment, from the followers, from the direct messages, from the confessions of vulnerable people. And all of that can look on the surface like healing. It can look like public truth telling. It can look like advocacy. It can look like courage. It can look like trauma education. But underneath, that may not be what is happening at all. Because for some narcissistic structures, especially when they have lost an important object, the platform is not about recovery. It is about the object that they lost. It is about the mortifying breakdown. It is about reconstituting the false self after injury. It is about externalizing themselves as the victim when, in reality, the other way round may have been far closer to the truth. It is about converting collapse into public narrative power. It is about replacing the lost object with an audience. It is about drawing in charge from strangers where the original object is gone. It is about turning pity, sympathy, admiration, outrage, and identification into narcissistic or sadistic supply. And that is why people have to stop assuming that tears equals truth, that dysregulation equals innocence, that trauma language equals honesty, that telling a story online over and over again means the person telling it has understood what actually happened. No, a narcissistic person can cry on camera. They can speak in the language of abuse. They can call themselves a victim. They can present as wounded, misunderstood, broken, lost, spiritual, traumatized, heartbroken, awakened, or healing. They can build an entire public identity around the idea that they survived a narcissist. They can become very convincing indeed, especially if they are covert, especially if they are intelligent, especially if they are malignant, especially if they understand how to perform vulnerability in a way that keeps people emotionally hooked. And once that identity begins to work for them, once they realize the platform can give them status, supply, audience capture, and emotional authority, they can go much further with it. That is where it starts becoming truly dangerous because it may not stop at content. It may not stop at a few videos. It may not stop at raising awareness. It starts to move into one to one spaces. It starts to move into coaching. It starts to move into sessions. It starts to move into, let me help you. It starts to move into private messages, paid calls, voice notes, WhatsApp, Zoom links, Patreon groups, courses, trauma circles, memberships, healing communities, and all the rest of it. And then what happens? Vulnerable people, real victims, desperate people, dysregulated people, people in post discharge scanning, looping, collapse, hypervigilance, panic, shame, and confusion start handing over their inner world to someone who may not be helping them at all. They hand over their stories, their trauma history, their personal life, their sexual history, their family pain, their secrets, their shame, their body memories, their confusion, their longing, their woundedness. And sometimes the person receiving all of that is not holding it ethically. They are harvesting it. That word matters, harvesting, because some of these people are not listening in order to help. They are listening in order to feed. They are taking in personal material, intimate disclosures, vulnerability, dependence, idealization, and trust, and using all of it as libidinal charge. They are feeding off the woundedness of people who are too dysregulated at that moment to discern whether they are in the presence of a genuine survivor doing honest work or a false self that has found a digital feeding ground. And if that person has falsified their education, falsified their qualifications, exaggerated their knowledge, or simply learned enough therapy language to sound credible, then the danger increases again. Because now they do not just look like a victim, they look like a victim expert, a victim healer, a victim guide, a victim guru, a victim therapist. And people are so vulnerable in these states, so desperate, so hungry for structure, for relief, for understanding, for someone who seems like they know. And that makes them very, very easy to take in. Some of these people will keep others as clients by blurring boundaries completely, giving free sessions, over giving, over contacting, making themselves seem endlessly available, endlessly caring, endlessly invested, not because they are genuinely helping the person move towards authorship and autonomy, but because dependency itself is part of the supply. The longer the person stays captured, the longer they stay emotionally fused, the longer they stay telling their story over and over again, the longer the narcissistic structure keeps feeding. Others will do it commercially and aggressively. They will sell themselves by the hour for vast amount of money, present themselves as trauma experts, abuse specialists, narcissism educators, relationship coaches, embodiment guides, somatic healers, whatever fits the market. And again, the vulnerable person often does not realize what is happening because they are so desperate to find relief, so desperate to feel understood, and so desperate to find that missing libidinal charge again. Some stabilizer, some gaze, some source of psychological holding that they can mistake charisma for integrity very, very easily. And then there is an even darker layer, especially with more malignant narcissistic structures. The platform may not only serve as a place to gain victimhood status and supply, it may also become a way to torture the once object who existed in their life and caused the mortifying breakdown. In other words, the digital performance is not merely self repair, it can also be revenge theatre. That fucking matters because people often do not realize that the internal fantasy can be externalized and lived out publicly on the platform itself. The narcissist loses the object, suffers mortification, needs to reconstitute, needs supply, needs narrative superiority, needs somewhere for the anti libido pressure to go, needs to turn shame into blame, weakness into authority, collapse into performance. And now the app gives them all of it. They can become the victim publicly. They can imply, insinuate, and reverse roles publicly. They can recruit witnesses publicly. They can build a following publicly. They can gather sympathetic others publicly. They can reframe the entire prior relationship publicly. They can make themselves the wounded one, the wise one, the truth teller, the brave survivor, while using the platform as a living extension of the internal fantasy. And in doing so, they are not only feeding themselves, they may be symbolically attacking, humiliating, or torturing the lost object from a distance through performance, subtext, role reversal, and audience capture. That is why people need to be very, very careful, because the recovery space is not automatically clean just because it uses the language of healing. In fact, narcissistic structures can thrive in exactly those environments because healing language gives them cover, victimhood gives them cover, trauma language gives them cover, public crying gives them cover, therapy language gives them cover, nervous system language gives them cover, and a sob story gives them cover. And if nobody is looking at the structure, real structure, the people end up handing their minds, their stories, and their trust to someone who may be no safer than the original relationship. That is the warning. Not everyone online is false. Not that every public survivor is lying. But that people need discernment. Serious discernment. You need to ask, is this person actually helping people become more self-authored, or are they gathering followers around themselves? Do they reduce dependency or deepen it? Do they clarify structure, ethics, boundaries, and limits? Or do they keep everything emotionally charged and centered on their own persona? Do they tolerate disagreement, or do they punish it by blocking you and then creating a video about how they are holding their boundaries strong against somebody who voiced a poor opinion of them? Do they speak with complexity, too much complexity, or do they sell certainty and theatre? Do they make people more grounded or more mesmerized? Do they help people get back to themselves, or do they become the new object around which people begin organizing? Do they seem to need access, confession, admiration, and emotional closeness from their audience? Do they keep people in permanent victim identity, or actually move them toward authorship? That is where people need to look, because real survivor work should not make you more dependent on the person teaching it. It should not make you more fused to them. It should not deepen your captivation. It should not keep you circling someone else as though they are the gate. It should move you back toward your own center, back toward your own reality, back towards your own authorship, back towards structure that is yours. And if someone's entire public identity depends on remaining the wounded authority forever, monetizing vulnerability, collecting private disclosures, blurring boundaries, presenting themselves as guru, coach, guide, brain spotting therapist, or specialist without proper ethical containment and keeping people emotionally tethered to them, then people should be extremely cautious because by that point, you may not be looking at healing at all. You may be looking at a false self that has found a digital feeding ground. And that is exactly why this matters so much in the narcissistic abuse space. Because survivors have already been colonized once. They've already lost reality once. They have already handed over their coherence once. The last thing they need is to walk into the recovery space and be taken in again by somebody wearing survivor skin while operating from an entirely different architecture underneath. That is the danger. That is the warning. And that is why people need to be very, very careful. Peace out. Take care out there.